So I wanted to give you some insight on Navigator 2.0, just in case you see this word flying around anywhere. So since there is a Navigator 2.0, there must have been a 1.0, right? So let's cover what that is first. So Navigator 1.0 is the thing we actually already covered in this course. It's the stack of screens that you can see, and you can interact with it in a couple ways. I'll cover them using the same slides as did before. You can push and pop things onto that stack. So let's say you have a home screen. You want to see another screen. You can push that on top of it, and now you have your stack of two screens, and you see the top one. If you want to go backwards, you just pop it off, and then you see the home screen again. So that's great, but what's the problem with this? Well, there's a couple issues. Firstly, you don't have full control of that stack. So if we go back to this previous example, let's say you have a stack of like 10 of them, and you want to remove this sixth thing within this stack. You don't really have access with the Navigator 1.0 way, which is what we covered. And then there's a pretty complicated use case that isn't used that often unless you have a very complicated application with a complicated navigation. So the other thing is similar story. For a very complicated navigation application, you might want something like nested navigation. So that means you have, within the whole navigation of your application, you have another sub-navigation section where you can navigate between screens within there too. That's also something that you can't really achieve with the 1.0 Navigator that we used already. Now, the last one is a big one though. With the original Navigator, the web support was lacking. So first, the back button didn't really work that well. And second, so if you went to a sub-page, so if you had a URL / some sort of other page within your application, that didn't work too well either. So to fix these issues, the Flutter team came up with Navigator 2.0. And the story behind this is when it came out, people struggled to implement it or struggled to understand it quickly. Now, maybe this doesn't look too bad to you, but it is a little bit complicated. Where you have your actual operating system, when you want to do a new route, you have to go through route name provider, route name parser, and then router delegate is the one that actually controls all the route logic. You also have a backbone dispatcher that goes into this as well. And this router delegate specifically controls all the actions within the routes. Now, if you're writing your own navigation using Navigator 2.0, you have to define each one of these. And that gets pretty complicated. And that's not just me being a bad Flutter developer. That's not just an opinion. That's a fact. If we go over to the Flutter documentation, we go over to the navigation section, go to navigation routing. They start first with showing off the Navigator 1.0. If we click using the router, which is the Navigator 2.0, quote unquote, you'll see they say Flutter applications with advanced navigation and routing should use a routing package such as GoRouter. They talk a little bit about GoRouter, then they talk about GoRouter over here as well. And they're like, where's the main Navigator 2.0 that I was talking about? Well, it's hidden within this one little note over here. It says, if you prefer not to use a routing package and would like full control over navigation routing in your app, override the route information parser and router delegate. And then you can control all the aspects of it. But that's a note for advanced developers, specifically those that need some of those very niche features that Navigator 2.0 provides. And not only that, because GoRouter actually provides those features, but you want to change how all that works. But let's cover GoRouter first. So if you do need that advanced navigation, I would default to going with GoRouter, unless there's something GoRouter does not support and you really need to go into the weeds with all of this. If you do want to learn more about Navigator 2.0 and kind of the design of all of it, scroll down to the bottom here and you'll have a router design document. And here it opens up a Google Doc with 21 pages describing that Navigator. So feel free to read through this for fun if you want to. Let's go over to the GoRouter. So GoRouter, if you read the description here, is a declarative router for Flutter based on Navigator 2, supporting deep linking, data-driven routes, and more. So it uses Navigator 2, so it solves all the issues that we brought up there. And if we go to the example, it's actually way easier to use. So if you're using Navigator 2.0 in any way, whether it's through a package or original, you have to do material app.router to have routes throughout your whole application. Now, if we go to the definition of material app.router within the API documents, you have to provide a router information provider, router information parser, a router delegate, router config, and back button dispatcher. So you can do all those, or you can provide a router config, and all these other ones have to be null. That's exactly what GoRouter does. You see we have app.router, and we provide a router config. So it's a configuration for all your routes within your application. And let's see how it's defined. It's a lot simpler. You just have a GoRouter class with all your routes in here. You have the home page and then a details page. And then how you use that within your application is just do context.go to the details page, or context.go/ to go to the home screen. You see, it's much, much simpler than implementing a whole Navigator 2.0 into your application. So when would I use Navigator 2.0? Honestly, I don't think I'd ever really need to use it. I'd even go even further. I'd say if you're not using any of these three things, let's say you're only deploying to iOS and Android, unless you have a really complicated navigation stack where you need to control things in the middle or nested things, you can still stick with Navigator 1.0. It's still fully supported, and the Flutter team, as far as I know, it doesn't have any plans to remove it because it's still good for the basic navigation where you just want to push and pop on top. But let's say you're building a Flutter web app, then I would definitely recommend going with GoRouter specifically. I would recommend to implement everything by yourself with Navigator 2.0, just because the Flutter team doesn't even recommend it, and it's just way easier to use GoRouter, and you get all the benefits, and you have all the web components working like the back button properly, and going into nested routes, so you can go to like /URL perfectly fine. And then I would only really use this if you have some very, very specific niche case where GoRouter doesn't work for you, and they have to learn all this and implement it. But I would say for the majority of us, we'll probably never have to deal with this.